Oh boy, I thought McLaren in 2016 was bad. Alpine is way worse. One of the biggest side stories of the year is how Alpine has seemingly imploded in the wake of the Piastri-Alonso contract debacle. And it's not helped over the ambiguity of Mick Schumacher's involvement with their endurance program. Come on, they don't need another contract mess on their hands, do they? But I think it runs deeper than that. The look on Pierre Gasly's face during the Qatar press conference said it all. He was looking absent, downtrodden, quickly dismissed the questions about Suzuka, whereas Esteban Ocon, asked a similar question, was very vocal and described in detail about the procedure that Alpine does in those situations in trying to gain positions. That, oh, it worked for Daniel Ricciardo, it worked for Fernando. I don't understand what the problem is with Pierre though. But Pierre though, he just looked vacant. If you just read the comment down on paper, that would have been that, but that face. That says it all. Pierre must be thinking, how did it come to this? I was expecting more. I was expecting to be able to forge my own destiny, climb the ladder. At least back at AlphaTauri he had a teammate he liked. You could describe Alpine as trying to rediscover themselves, reinvent themselves for a new age. Like they did in 2021, and 2016, and 2011, and 2002. Can you see where I'm going here? This isn't the first time that this has happened. This is meant to be a big representation of the Renault group, trying to really be a good example of their e-tech technology, their electric cars, their hybrid technology in F1, then trickling down to their road cars. Renault has been around Formula One for about 4 decades in some capacity, so they're not newcomers to Formula One, but it just feels like that they just aren't quite sure who they are right now. There's no way to define this company. They renamed themselves to Alpine, trying to showcase their sports car division. This team is now not really a team, it's a billboard for a car company with only one car. I mean, they promised to make more cars, but I've yet to see them. It's happened many times, and it happened for the first time back in 1985. Between 77 and 85, they had a pretty solid stint with Alain Prost being one of their drivers, but they ultimately decided to abandon the team due to budgeting concerns and then just focus on making engines. In any case, I think that 2023 is yet another example of this Alpine, Renault, Enstone team trying to figure out what they are and then try and rejig things to make things better. Or they can just abandon the team and just sell it off to the highest bidder or give it to one of their shareholders, or maybe sell it to Andretti perhaps if their own bid doesn't work out. I don't really think it's going to come to that though. Despite all of the woes and worries of that team, they're not losing money. It's not like that this time. Budget concerns aren't really an issue because Alpine for 2022, they actually turned a profit of £26 million, which is good to see. And that seems to be across the board for all of the Formula One teams. Like Williams, for example. Between 2021 and 2022, they made £45 million more. And that was before James Vowles came along. Can you imagine how much better it's going to be for 2023? I don't think you really need to be worried about any Formula One team. Not even Haas, because they've openly admitted that they actually have enough money now to fulfill the entire proportion of the cost cap. Finally. After, what, like 7 years? So I guess you really don't need to be bought out anyway, but these days, with the way that F1 teams value themselves, that seems practically impossible. This isn't going to be like back in the day when Braun bought the Honda company for £1. Okay, that was symbolic, but you know what I'm getting at here. According to the whole shareholder thing, when Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney's group bought into Alpine, it valued the team at about $1.2 billion, which makes the cheapest team, around about like Haas Williams money, of around $700 million. And then the owner of Rodin Cars tried to actually, in secret, actually discuss about buying out AlphaTauri, which is something I did theorize in one of my other videos back in the day, and he couldn't do it because they were asking for between $800 to $900 million for the team, and he didn't want to stump up the cash for it, and it left him pretty, as he said, pissed off. I bet Doralton Capital, who actually bought Williams in 2020 for $200 million, are sitting pretty right now, but it's a good thing that they are looking to Formula One for the long term, and they're not willing to make a quick buck at the moment, so good on them. The real issue with Alpine is that everything seems to be surrounded in conflict, misery, and intensity, trying to point the blame at one particular person. And Fernando Alonso isn't there to stir the pot, and neither was he the cause of the conflict to spread with Alpine or Renault at all. They lost him due to the fact they were playing fast and loose with his contract, then forgetting to dangle the carrot to Oscar Piastri and Mark Webber, and they just disappeared. So all of that That's just really silly. And then they got the Mick Schumacher thing about whether or not he's going to be joining their WEC program, and then that's been denied. You feel, oh my goodness, what is going wrong with their admin? And now the actual proper team principal, Bruno Famin, who had been the caretaker team principal, has revealed that this is actually a really big problem. There is so much division between all of the different departments amongst the team that there's no unity. He's been trying to call for unity to try and build the team back up again. And it all comes down to the two different factories that the Alpine team has. And you see, it's not all done at Enston. They actually have another division in France that actually deals with the power units. The engine side of things, that's done down in Viry-Châtillon. When Luca De Meo came in, he was absolutely flabbergasted at the fact that things had gotten so bad amongst the car makers and the engine makers. The English and French divisions of the Alpine team slept in different hotels. They didn't sleep in the same place. They kept themselves completely separate and only coming together on the day when they're at the actual track. And it wasn't a recent phenomena either. This has been going on for years. It was a them and us culture, and simply, he just reckoned that was never going to work. Of course it's not going to work. There have been simulations run for the Qatar Grand Prix, and Alpine now is dead last. Slower than Haas. Slower than Alfa Romeo. And this was the team that was meant to be, at the beginning of the season, the 4th or 5th fastest car. Somewhere in the middle, but fairly decent and consistently running for points. How did it get so bad? I saw that in 2016 with McLaren. When Eric Bourrier came in, Ron Dennis was on his way out, you felt that the team was just ripping itself to pieces. This is exactly the same thing happening here. And De Meo actually brought up the 100 Years' War, saying that that's not a thing anymore. England and France shouldn't be fighting each other. Again, his words, not mine. But luckily for them, when it comes to the engine deficiency, that will be rebalanced for the next engine development cycle. But they do still need to deal with the whole reliability sort of things at Alpine, because they've got the least reliable car on the grid. I can't really think of that many DNFs from this season, but most of them come from Alpine. And then we get to the drivers. I don't want to blame Esteban Ocon fully for all of the discord amongst the ranks of the teams and the drivers, but let's just say that a lot of incidents on track recently and amongst everywhere else, you feel like Esteban Ocon's at the center of it all. We didn't see all that much of it in 2020 when Daniel Ricciardo was there and Esteban was his teammate, and the gap between them was vast. Daniel was very much in charge. The deficiency between him and Ricciardo was quite big, about a quarter of a second or so. And when it came to qualifying, 15-2 in favor of Daniel. There was no real conflict between he and Ocon, and it just seemed to go by quite reasonably. Ocon wasn't really the kind of driver that had built that reputation in 2018 and 2017 for knocking into teammates and taking out Verstappen and Interlagos when he was being lapped. Then he got his first win in 2021, and things kind of elevated from there. Then you started to see him actually getting more punchy. And then, really, Alonso, wanting him to defend like a lion in Qatar, really, Alonso, you should have been more careful about what you wished for, because now Ocon is like a wild animal sometimes. He is fighting with his teammate, he's fighting other drivers, and he's just sort of dominating people and teams without really looking like he's dominating at all. When you put him on a track, he's vicious. Then this year we get Pierre Gasly coming in, and even though they have had a lot of beef in the past, they have promised not to actually bring that to the Alpine table this year. And even though they haven't crashed into each other yet, they have been in roughly the same place when those two cars have actually double DNF'd. But again, I'm not saying it's them deliberately crashing into each other, it's just weird that it's happened multiple times. But also you get that feeling that really things aren't quite equal there, that seniority at Alpine counts a lot. Esteban has actually now been the longest serving driver there in a very long time. You might argue that, Fernando Alonso was there for a very long time. Well, he had 3 stints there. And the last 2 stints, he only was there for about 2 seasons or so, and I don't really count that. But Bestie, he's been there for 4 seasons now, so he has actually developed the team around him, to the point where the actual driver cockpit is more tailored towards Esteban Ocon than Pierre Gasly. Something that Gasly has actually requested for the new car, the A524, for it to actually have a shorter cockpit, so he doesn't have to reach out so much. And you feel like, well, that's something they geared towards Esteban, and yes, Esteban was there from last year, and you feel like Gasly should actually have that tailored or his seat adjusted, but at least the rest of the car seems to be something that they can relatively agree with. Japan was a very interesting turning point. I know, people are sick and tired of people talking about Suzuka, but it has to be said. And this isn't mainly down to those 2 drivers, it's down to the fact that the team just dropped the ball. It was really bad miscommunication. And even though the two drivers want to bury it in the sand and they've probably been told to drop it and not drag it out any longer, the fact is that it happened. It was not a clear instruction, and Esteban carried himself off like he was the guy who already knew this, and Gasly was the ignorant swine who wasn't really playing ball and had a really big temper tantrum afterwards. So you can tell that the momentum in that team is towards Esteban Ocon. But at this point, there's really no reason to swap positions because you feel like, well, what difference is it going to make for 1 point? Honestly. But actually, you could say it had a little bit of significance, ensured that Ocon slightly closed the gap to Gasly in the driver standings for the year, and it prevented Gasly overtaking Stroll in the standings too. I know it's small potatoes, but when you're actually finding a team that is really looking at likely finishing 6th place in the Constructors, I think you just gotta consider this a win. But you feel that Alpine is truly trying to reset itself with the new presence from Renault CEO Luca ditching all of those infamous 5-year plans the outfit has gone on about since 2016, as well as removing Laurent Rossi, whose bully tactics and amateurish name-calling of his own team wasn't exactly conducive for team building in a team which has clearly got a cultural split. And honestly, Renault have actually got to step up and try and find themselves some teams to actually partner up with for power units, especially in 2026, when you've got Ford and Audi coming in. Proper big works teams, proper big global manufacturers, and then Renault's there, fighting amongst itself with the weakest engine and no customers, and then having your own works team completely divided and right at the back, with no sign of it actually getting better? Oh dear, you're going to be embarrassed by these two newcomers. Albeit, granted, we are not quite sure what Ford's actually going to be doing with Red Bull. Is it just going to be a badge? Is it going to be actual proper involvement with the engine? That's not really been discussed yet. So quite frankly, with Luca actually doing this right now, I think they'll be fine for 2026, but right now, it is very, very rocky and they really need this reset. In any case, Alpine this year has felt like Haas sometimes in its internal friction and lack of development. They've had their moments, like Esteban Ocon getting a podium at Monaco, and Pierre Gasly getting his own podium in the sprint race for Spa, right after Otmar Szafnauer was sacked. But you feel like Alpine's in an identity crisis and they're not quite sure where to go. Do they actually proceed with the Alpine brand? Do they try and change the team? Do they really need to bring the two departments together and stop all of this bickering amongst the English and French contingents? You just feel like Alpine doesn't really know what it wants to be. Does it want to be a Formula 1 team, or does it want to be a commercial for its sports cars? You really need to figure things out, because Renault has quite a long history, and a successful history within Formula 1, and right now, it kind of looks like a joke. And you just feel like, what's happening with them? Formula 1 right now is meant to be the creme de la creme of motorsport. That's what they're trying to tout and keep Andretti out of the sport, like we're saying quality is king. And right now, Alpine does not look quality. But hopefully they will address that. Especially when at one point of this season, the gap between McLaren and Williams was actually similar. Williams were almost closer to them than Alpine were to McLaren. Oof. Alpine's situation is looking very, very vague. Much like how the engine options for McLaren in 2026 are kind of looking vague as well. And I talk more about that in this video next.